So first I just want to talk about acquisition. If you guys are familiar with what we do here, then this is gonna make sense already, but, so if you're shooting on camera, whether it be film or digital, it needs to get to us in color somehow. So in the old days of film, that would be scanning the film, and then we would be the digital intermediate. So that's where that DI term came from, the scanning of the neg, and then us putting it back out to film is analog, digital, analog, right? So we were the digital intermediate in between that. Nowadays, it's all acquired digitally, and then we grade it digitally, and then it's released digitally. So but there's not really a digital intermediate anymore, it's just all digital. But every now and then, a film like Oppenheimer will still go out to print, so that's cool. Film is still alive. So this question mark at the very end of the stage, right? We're outputting it to the TV. I just wanted to cover that. That's where the LUTs or the lookup tables or color space transforms. That's where that kind of stuff would come in. And in that film print day, that LUT would emulate what the stuff would look like when we go out to print, right? So a lot of those LUTs were meant to emulate the print as closely as possible so that we knew digitally what it would look like on film. The thing is, those LUTs kind of hung around because we got really good at calibrating those and emulating the different stocks. And so now that film look that we have in that LUT is sought after. And even though we're shooting digitally, almost everything goes through some kind of print emulation to some degree. Now, camera manufacturers, including Panasonic, have their own kind of printless translation that goes from their linear light camera data to screen in a transformer that doesn't incorporate film in any way, but we usually like to add a little bit of that film flavor just to add a little bit of stylistic color grade to it. So I'm going to be talking about LUTs, so I just want to make sure that all made sense and kind of the history of where they all came from. So the first thing that we would do when working on a show is we'd probably select the LUT, especially as early as we can so that they can be used on set and in dailies. And if we can keep that same LUT throughout the whole life of the show, it makes everything a lot easier because we can give that to the VFX vendors and they can be previewing all of their work through the same transform that we're ultimately going to be grading through, and it just makes everything more consistent. So that's what a LUT looks like when mapped in 3D space. Just want to show that because it's fun to look at, but basically it's all the different color values, and then there's overall saturation is that fourth dimension. So okay, so what would the different LUTs look like? So I'll just kind of shift through we'll just cycle through some different LUTs, right? So we've got, these are the same shot running through different stocks and different emulations. Some of them are print-based and some aren't. And when we are trying to decide on one of these, there's a few things we're looking at, right? There's how do they react to certain colors? So like maybe this story is about someone who wears a red dress all the time, so maybe how the red reacts in the LUT is going to be really important, so we might be looking at that. You can see in some of these it becomes more rolled off and desaturated, and others it retains as much of the natural hue as possible. Other things we might be looking for are how strongly are the highlights rolled off. So in the building in the back, all of these LUTs are doing a different type of curve on the top end. And so the amount of detail that is preserved or clipped off might be important because, again, a lot of us are still chasing that kind of film look, and that can often mean losing detail, right? It's not always about preserving detail when we're getting creative. It can be about losing it as well. So how much detail we retain is a choice. And then the last thing I'll just show, this same chip chart through all these different LUTs. You can kind of see how not only does saturation change, but the hue of the red can change, and this magenta too. You can see it's kind of going all over the place. And those are how different stocks would have reacted. So that can all be an important choice.
The stocks are yours, or do you use?
Yeah, so we would have made our own tests
Okay.
that we go out to film, we bring that
Okay.
back in, and then
Okay.
for projection prints, we would actually split it, digital projector and then film projector.
Okay.
And then we would just loop that over and over again,
Okay. changing
and calibrating until we got a digital version that looked as close to that
Okay.
print as possible. And then you can do that for different stocks and things like
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then, so the last fun thing on the LUT selection is the choice to go to HDR. Because that's always something that is happening now. That's far more common now than it was even a year ago. Almost every episodic show, at least, and probably most features are shooting with HDR on their mind. So we would want to determine like how much HDR, right? So I can just amplify that up. Oh, let me change this. Okay, so boom, so we can go from your standard dynamic range Rec 709 of 100 nits, or we could ramp it all the way up to what these monitors support, which is 1,000. Right, and you can actually see the way that I have this mapped in the color corrector. I'm pulling data. Right now I have a LUT that's rolling the highlight detail off, but I can actually go around that and pull that highlight detail back. So by getting brighter, not only is it getting brighter, I'm actually recovering some of that detail. So, but that's a creative choice as well, because while we can maximize it, we can go all the way to 1,000, or the spec itself allows to go to 10,000, which is mind-numbingly bright, and we don't even consider that at this stage. But we have to decide, when do we want to use this 1,000? Because if we have it at 1,000 all the time, it can be pretty tiring on the eyes, and it also might not fit the look of the show. So, what do we do when we're grading? Let me just kind of show some of the basics. So, obviously the first thing you'll notice is like these shots are all over the place in terms of color, contrast, exposure, and all that stuff. So the most basic thing we would do is just try to balance that stuff out. You know, and just using basic controls, we can.
Does the footage always has enough stops, enough dynamic to get 1,000 nits?
No, it
Without-
doesn't.
Without
So
bending?
it's a lot of times when you're considering how much latitude the digital camera has, you're assuming that you're not going to use all that all the time. But if we are planning on delivering 1,000 nits, then we're going to need as much of that as possible. So a lot of times, yeah, we can be revealing things that might have been clipped and not even seen in an SDR environment. But now that we're in HDR, oh, we've hit the limit of that exposure that we hadn't planned for. So that's why it is helpful to have HDR monitoring on set, so you can actually check and make sure, okay, if we want to expose for that window, it's that detail's there. But a lot of times when you're shooting, and I'll show an example of that, if you're shooting out a bright window inside of a building or something, a lot of times you would expect to roll that off and just have it go to white. You know, traditionally, I just want to blow that out and have it go to white. But in HDR, that's not always possible or not always feasible, because now we've opened that up and now you see outside that window. And so we have to factor that in. You can't just throw a grid back there or some sort of diffusion and think that you're going to lose all the detail. I would have to go in and artificially clip that detail back off in HDR. Okay, so yeah, basic grading, which is just matching things together so that they look kind of seamless shot to shot. Right, that's kind of the first step, and that's something that we would also consider doing a camera test. Is like let's just try to see how this footage is working together. If they were able to shoot a camera test with any sort of variety of setting, things like that. So the other thing we would do is maybe they don't have the actual look of the show defined or determined ahead of time. So we might just need to try different looks, right? So we could do something a little crazy. Just kind of push the image around and try different things.
So this is actually your decision. You don't have here the cinematographer, or how does it work?
That it does depend on the show,
Okay.
because for political reasons, not every department head is always present. But yeah, usually a director or a director of photography are involved in setting this look
Okay.
in the beginning, and then in the final, it can depend on who comes in and actually does the final sign off. But yeah, all those people who are capturing the image on set are usually going to contribute to how the look ends up in color. And a lot of that too is determined by production design and things like that.
Okay.
So hopefully there's already been a palette and that discussion has happened in pre-production.
Okay.
And then if it has, by the time we get to grading, it all just kind of falls together and we're just adding that little polish and the finish onto the end of
Okay.
it.
And you split between SDR and HDR?
Yes, so in like a Dolby Vision environment, you'd be grading HDR primarily, and then the Dolby analysis would be giving you an SDR at the same time.
Okay.
And then, as you change the HDR grade, you do kind of have to keep up on your analysis for
Okay.
the SDR. So yeah, I'd say like 90% of the episodic stuff we do is Dolby Vision.
Okay.
So it's just keeping up on that SDR. Because ironically, while we're grading in HDR, all the editorial environments are still usually SDR. So I'm grading HDR, trimming, and then sending them files to review in SDR
Okay.
until they can come in and do the final HDR grade.
Okay.
And how do you make your decisions? On which base?
In the like color decisions.
Yeah, kind of. Is it from a stomach, or is it, or do you have a script or something like this?
Sometimes I do get the script. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it definitely it is always dependent on the story, and
Yeah.
that can sometimes sound like a cliche, but it really does depend on the story because
Mhm.
if this is a sad moment,
Yeah.
maybe going really warm doesn't make sense, right? So maybe this blue can help sell something that they weren't able to sell in
Yeah.
the performance or in the sound or something like
Mhm.
that. So it's another way to help skew the viewer in a certain direction in an emotional way. So yeah, so I do try to consider what's happening in the story. I also try to
Yeah.
consider what was captured because
Uh-huh.
if we're trying to force it in one direction too hard, maybe that's doing a disservice to the photography and the story because now
Mhm.
we're making it look artificial in a way that it was never meant to be. So,
So, and can I say each different color has a different emotion meaning? If it's the picture is more bluish, it's more sad, and when it's warm, it's more happy, or is it?
yeah, I wouldn't say blue always means sad for sure,
Yeah.
but I don't know. We probably do interpret it differently, right? And
Mhm.
that's why different colorists and different DPs tend to work together more frequently because they've
Yeah.
developed a language together.
Mm-hmm.
Because they can use shorthand, right? They know like, oh, I need this to feel a certain way, and the colorist knows how to
Yeah.
interpret that in the way that
Uh-huh.
they're looking for. So yeah, no, I think we all interpret it a little differently. But it's also, it can be helpful to try different things and try pushing it in different directions and then see like, oh, that's what I was looking for, but I couldn't describe it, or
Mhm.
I didn't know how to get to that feeling.
For this particular scene, do you have the final look slate so we can see how it looks in the final edit? Is it how it looks? This one?
No, I don't have the
Just
actual grade.
out of curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of go off of memory. This was not
I was
crazy.
hoping you could do this by memory.
Right. Yeah, it was probably like this because at the end of this scene, the sun was going down and there was an explosion in the tunnel, and he was
just at the closure.
yeah. This was the end of the scene, so it was close to this, I'd say.
Okay.
Right, and that's also just because I remember part of the look of the show was we were skewing the highlights more yellow and less saturation overall, and all those things kind of factor together in determining the look, which is part of it, like how to make the decisions. A lot of different factors,
Yeah.
I think. This was the third season of a show, so there was already like a natural evolution of the look of the show.
So you can change every color, right? Can the footage be black and white?
Black and white, yeah, we can mix it the way you would with filters in front of a black and white stock,
Mhm.
right? You can prioritize the red channel or the green channel, or
Yeah.
mix the channels to alter the black and white in that kind of way. Can it be any color? I mean, there are limitations to if it's believable, but
Yeah.
we can certainly try anything.
Yeah. Now, the last time I was here, I've heard it doesn't matter. In former times, you always have to film the one scene under the same light conditions.
Mhm.
But nowadays, it doesn't matter anymore.
Are you thinking of like the relight
Yeah.
tool? Yeah,
Yeah.
there are some AI tools that are in the works. I haven't used them in a professional
Mhm.
environment yet. I haven't used them on any show yet.
Mhm.
That actually might be something Siggy brings up because he likes being on the cutting edge of that kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
I think he's been demoing the relight, so he might talk about that. I'm not totally sure.
Mhm.
What I do, and I'll show you a sort of a rudimentary version of relighting, like a day for night with suboptimal source material.
Mhm.
That is kind of doing it more with a brute force method, where I'm just kind of I'm adding light and darkening light without any sort of AI tools.
Yeah.
Because I do think the AI thing is going to be interesting once it gets incorporated into the color corrector in a user-friendly way, the way that
Mhm.
Photoshop does now, which is
Yeah.
wild. You just type in what you want and put it in a box, and it fills it in.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I think we are near to that in Da Vinci.
I think we're pretty close.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah.
May I ask you something?
Yep.
Here we are in a 1000 nit maximum environment because of the monitor, because of the TV set, but maybe the client wants to go up. How does it work? Do you just trust the scopes, or you just say I need to go in another room because I need the Dolby
Pulsar?
monitor? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we still have a pulsar somewhere. We might not have it anymore.
Is there demand to go higher?
There's
No.
not.
Okay.
No,
It
honestly,
really happened.
the demand is kind of skewing lower, honestly.
Yeah.
There are occasionally, like I said, there are certain circumstances where the brighter is better. Like Star Trek, for instance. There are, when I'm in space and there's like a planet exploding, cool, let's go all the way to 1,000. Do we need to go to 4,000? I don't know. We did on Star Wars Force Awakens. You know, that planet explodes in that, and we did go to 4,000 for that particular shot.
But
Did it
you-
make the shot better? I don't know. It looked cool. But it is so different than the rest of the show. I mean, we're going so much brighter than where the rest of the show's living. So I think where that brighter 4,000 nit, 10,000 nit thing is really going to come into play is like archiving reality stuff, like things that we need to capture as they were in real life. That's going to be really awesome because nature in sports at 10,000 nits, it would look like real life, basically.
Mhm.
So that'd be interesting.
But can you trust the scopes, or do you need to
Oh.
see on the monitor?
I would prefer to see it
Okay.
because what happens when we have one part of the image that's really bright and another part that's not, it can get really distracting. So if this, right, so if this is hitting 1,000 nits,
Yeah.
that is really distracting when I'm trying to look at his face and see what he's saying, right?
Okay.
That's not the look of the show. And if that was more the look of the show,
Okay.
much easier to digest what's going on in the darkness.
Uh-huh.
So if we're averaging
Expanding. Okay.
even
yes.
brighter, then I
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
need to see how it plays against the darker areas.
Understood.
Because the brighter it is, it makes everything else feel darker. So
Okay.
I think there's a perceived contrast in place there. Because yeah, I actually could, I have this hard clipped. I could push this to 4,000 and we wouldn't see it, it would just get more and more clipped. But I have no idea of knowing what the relation between light and dark would be at that point.
Perfect.
Okay, so these are all really awesome technical questions, which means I can skip all the boring basic stuff. Because you guys all know what a power window would be then. Yeah, I mean, really that's kind of the stuff I was going to cover is HDR and how distracting would it be because, for example, this stuff, right, if this was living down here, which is around 300 nits, this is what was intended because it's not distracting. Now, like, could we go to 1,000? Yeah, that's neat, but it didn't always work for a show like this because then it started to draw attention to itself, and that's really where it's awesome having a larger toolbox of HDR, but it also becomes more. You need to be more selective about using it correctly and making sure we're taking care. Because also when it looks great here, we do still have to consider the SDR version, and if we're averaging much brighter. When you squeeze that back down to SDR, everything feels so dull and so desaturated and so boring, and you're like, what happened to this rich, vibrant show we had? And it's hard to replicate that if everything is already so bright. Not to say we shouldn't like compromise the vision for SDR, but it's just something to think about. Okay, so this is just more HDR stuff. Let's see. All right, so if this was brighter. That would be pretty neat. Alright, getting the last glimpse of the bright headlights, so that's just another HDR consideration. Let's see, patch replacer, you guys have probably seen this, and this is something that comes up a lot in color. This used to be more of a VFX task, but now it's very much a color thing. Okay. So, just removing things in the frame, that has come up a lot now. So removing like that text from that electrical box. Something we would have had to push to VFX before, but now we can do that in color as well as a lot of beauty work, which I know Stevie's going to cover. That's where a lot of this colorist tool set has evolved. It's no longer just, can we grade it to make it look nice? Yes, we can, but also you can be asked to do a lot of things that were borderline VFX things before, which is cool. I mean, it's nice to be able to do that stuff. Okay, so this is the fun shot that I was talking about. Let me fix this HDR business. Okay, so this was not supposed to be day or night. And so it's right here. Oh, I know why. Okay. So this was just an example of, I just want to show like if I was asked to make something day for night, this was like a really fast and not ideal version, but this was not nighttime, obviously, you can tell because it's just not set up for that. Oops.
It was an American night.
It was American Night, right? So I gotta make these other two clips. Okay, so one of the things that I did was get rid of this guy walking, because it made it feel more like daytime. And also at the end of the shot, there's a car that pulls up in the top center with no headlights on, right? So that was another giveaway of not being nighttime. So those are some things to think about, and then also just the entire shot.
But does this help with HDR? Filming in daylight and then transforming in a night sequence? Does it help with the dynamics?
I don't know if it does.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, when we need to make things more constricted, having SDR as a smaller toolbox, it can be helpful. Because with HDR, it's a little harder to fool the eye because we can
Okay.
see all that extra detail.
Okay.
So with SDR, it might be a little easier to kind of mask that.
But you'll probably have less noise, or not?
In HDR?
No, if you film in daylight
Mhm.
and then bring it to a night shot, as we saw before, you will have less issues with noise at the low ends
Sure.
of the luminance.
Yeah, I mean, and that's been true with film too. It's
Yeah.
always exposed a little
Oh, yeah,
higher to
okay.
get more detail in the negative. But it's all about how convincing is the source material,
Okay.
right? I mean, like
Okay.
this would have been benefited from having some lamps on or something I could grab onto
Okay.
and emphasize.
Okay.
Trying to transform something that is so clearly day into night without some sort of anchor and reference point,
Okay.
like even having headlights on or something like that. And that's where this is almost getting pushed to VFX at that point,
Mm.
because maybe they need to go into 3D space and actually project some
Okay.
lighting off of some
Mm.
other 3D object to cast shadows.
Mhm.
But maybe the relight tool will get us there. I don't know.
Quite amazing.
Yeah. So I mean that's really it. I was just going to show basic color and yeah, good questions.
Which software do you use?
It's
Da
Resolve.
Vinci. Yeah, the
DaVinci
Resolve.
Resolve. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's the monitor is a HX 300 or 310?
It's the 300.
No, 300. Okay.
Yeah, I
I
don't
see.
know if we have any 310s in the building. We might, but I think we bought the rest of the 300s. So, yeah, and they're
You
all
wanted
in-
all it.
We wanted all it. Yeah. They're all in storage somewhere.
So that's 25 minutes now, so guys, we're going to have to move from
Okay.
here to the
Okay.
yellow.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Of course.